Lebanon. Starts today. Bolivar's got one coming up.
Bolivar's just finished.
Just finished? Okay.
Yeah,
Just
that
finished.
was with BJ.
With BJ, okay. I looked back there, but I don't remember. I know there's several gospel meetings coming up. Liberty's got one coming up. Something else. Blue Springs has got one coming up. You can watch that on YouTube. Grace Owens is doing that one in Blue Springs. You can watch it on YouTube.
Nah.
You'd rather not. Sometimes I agree with you on that one.
I talk to him too much throughout the week.
I know KE just finished up theirs. You can watch that on their Facebook page if you didn't get to watch it. Next week will be our singing, so make plans for that. Is there anything else? I'm not aware of anything. If not, Cody, would you open us with a word of prayer, and then we'll get started.
Please got me. Heavenly Father, thank you for letting us come together this morning to worship you and learn more about your word. Please be with those on the prayer list, and be with those that just need prayer in general. Please be with those that are traveling, and in Jesus' name, amen.
All right, we're in Hebrews chapter 11 this morning. Hebrews 11, and we are working our way through Hebrews. Just kind of a reminder again of some of the things we've been dealing with. Remember the book of Hebrews, written to Jewish Christians who were contemplating returning to the old law, returning back to the law of Moses and the old covenant. And the entire theme of the book of Hebrews was this idea of the church is better. And we see that idea repeated over and over again through the book, and then we get into the ending of chapter 10, and he's going to lay out some examples here and really demonstrate the faith aspect. And then we get into chapter 11, and we see this idea, and we've pointed out when we've gone throughout this idea of every example we see of faith. We see that it's by faith or through faith or because of faith, somebody did something. And there's always some kind of an action coupled with that idea of faith. And we finished up last week there dealing with the idea of Moses and the faith that he had, and the faith that he was able to see. And we ended last week there dealing with the idea of him being able to see the invisible and hoping for rewards that were greater than what could be found in the land of Egypt. And we talked about him celebrating the Passover and the account at the Red Sea. We dealt with all of that. And remember, we pointed out there, as we closed last week, there in verse 29, the idea that it's not just Moses' faith that is being talked about in verse 29, but there is an instance of the faith of the entirety of the nation. Wow. Glad I'm not preaching today, because I cannot talk this morning. The faith of the entirety of the nation of Israel, there, moving into verse 29. Now we move into verse number 30, and we have a little bit of a time jump here. We jump about 40 years because we get through the Red Sea crossing, and then we've got the wilderness wandering, and then we get down to verse number 30. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. Verse 31, by faith, the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe when she had received the spies with peace. So we're going to stop right there because those two verses kind of go together hand in hand. There. Now, verse 30 is another instance where there again we see our idea of by faith, through faith, or because of faith, the walls of Jericho. Now, here our format's a little bit different because our person that is demonstrating the faith is not specifically mentioned. Because can the walls of a city have faith? Walls of a city can't have faith. So our person or people that they're showing the faith is not specifically mentioned. So when we think about this person or people who are demonstrating the faith in verse 30, most likely it's the faith of who? Again, children of Israel is the idea. It goes back to, in verse 29, we saw the faith of the children of Israel, the nation of Israel, and the same thing in verse 30. And when I went back and I started thinking about this, think of how crazy does this sound? God tells Joshua, you assemble all the people and you go walk around that city one time each day for 6 days. On the seventh day, you walk around that city 7 times. And that's how crazy does that sound? Just walk around the city. Make some noise on the trumpets and just assemble and walk around the city. And does that take a lot of faith to do that? I think it does. I think here's another instance where we see this great faith of the children of Israel. Now, I also started thinking about this. One of the ways that we see, you have to understand that by the time we get to the siege of Jericho, this is a different generation than we see at the Red Sea, isn't it? The first generation has died off. They've been killed during the 40 years of wandering. Remember the rebellion at Kadesh Barnea, and the spies went in and said, oh, we can't take the land. There's like grasshoppers. The first generation has been killed off. There we see a second generation. And I think sometimes we view the wilderness wandering and we look at it as, well, it was a period of punishment. Yeah, it was a period of punishment, but also, can we not look at the 40 years of wandering as a period of time to strengthen the faith of the second generation? Because don't we see, when you go back and you look at the 40 years, how many miracles do we see God perform taking care of his people? Miracle after miracle after miracle. Now, whether the miracle is killing 70,000 people by opening up the ground and swallowing them whole, or the bronze serpents, or giving them manna and quail, we still see miracles, and it helps build their faith, and that leads to the events that we see at Jericho. And it's going to take a great deal of faith to bring out Jericho. And here's why. It's going to take a lot of faith and a lot of obedience in God to bring out faith, because the very next battle that we see, when they go up against the city of Ai, what happens?
God to go with them, got defeated.
Exactly. They didn't listen to God, and they got their backsides kicked pretty badly. Now, to kind of bring out the idea of the size difference here, Jericho was a city, let's say it was a city the size of like Springfield or St. Louis. It's a big city. Ai was a city like, I don't know, Buckhorn out here. Just a little hole in the wall. It has a gas station and a post office and a church. That's the city here, and Israel got their backsides handed to them at Ai. So it takes a lot of faith and obedience in God to do this, because Joshua said, just march around the city. You don't have to have a weapon. You don't have to even raise a sword. And the city will fall. And then we get into verse number 31. And we talk about Rahab. Now, there's a couple of things to bring out about Rahab. Again, we've got our by faith, through faith, or because of faith. Our person is Rahab here. And what's interesting about Rahab is she's one of the only women mentioned in chapter 11. There's very few women mentioned in chapter 11. There's Sarah, there's Rahab, and there's allusions to Deborah. There's allusions to a couple of other women of faith in chapter 11, even though they're not specifically mentioned. But one of the things that I believe truly stands out about Rahab is, was she a child of God? She wasn't an Israelite, was she? She demonstrates this great faith, and she's not an Israelite. Now, how was it that she showed her faith?
By hiding them.
By hiding the spies. She took care of those spies when they came in. She took care of those spies. You remember they sent spies in to spy and scout out the city of Jericho, and Rahab took them in and hid them and protected them. She held their faith. And when you go back and you look at that account, news and word of the God of Israel, did the people of Jericho know about the God of Israel?
Word was out is what had happened.
What?
Word was out is what had happened.
Exactly. Word was out is what had happened. Remember, if you go back, how many nations did Israel defeat before the conquest, before they crossed the River Jordan? How many nations did Israel defeat? Jericho, and the people of Jericho and Rahab, they had heard what Israel was capable of and what the God of Israel was capable of. And she used that, and by faith. Now, the other aspect of her faith here, that not only did she believe it to save just herself, and did it grant her salvation because of what she did, but it also everybody in her household, right? Everybody that was there with her and that actually listened to her. I think it's a great deal of faith, and I think it stands out that it's not necessarily the children of Israel that demonstrate great faith. And if you remember, you go back, there's a time when Jesus, he's talking to the Jews. And you remember what he says about the faith in now I can't remember who it was. Troas? What? No, it wasn't Nineveh. Nineveh had a great faith too. One of the coastal cities. I don't remember now what it was. But Jesus talks about their faith is greater than even that of the Jews. There is the idea. And I really think this is really kind of foreshadowing this idea of who all is going to be accepted into the church. It's not just Israel, is it? The church is for everybody. The church is for everybody. And Rahab here demonstrates this great faith. And I also think, this is me, there's a great deal of honor here bestowed upon Rahab, because she's included in this hall of faith in Hebrews chapter 11. I think there's a great deal of honor and respect that, hey, you've got all of these great examples of faith. You've got Moses, you've got Abraham, you've got Noah included in this hall of faith, and then here's Rahab. That even her faith was worthy to be included and listed in this list that we see here in Hebrews chapter 11. And it really stands as a great example of how our faith, even today, has the power to save us, but it also has the power to save who? Save our family, save our friends. We can be that example to them.
You know, it's unique that Rahab was used because, number one, she's a woman.
Mm-hmm.
When all the great leaders and Moses and all were men. And then number two, she wasn't even of the house of faith, but she still believed, showing that all mankind could have that.
She still believed. She was a woman, and she still believed. She wasn't a direct descendant of Abraham, and she still had this faith in Jehovah and the faith in the power, and she believed that, hey, the armies of Israel out there, they can destroy this entire city. And she believed that. It's actually really cool when you go look at some of the archaeological evidence of Jericho. They actually think that they know where Rahab's house was, because there's a section of the old wall that's still standing and it predates everything else. It's actually really cool. You can go look at it. Can't say for sure, but they think they know where her house was on the wall. Any other comments or questions on verses 30 and 31? All right, we're going to move into verse 32. Now, here the Hebrew writer runs into probably one of the biggest adversaries of a preacher. The clock. Because in verse 32, and what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of aliens. And I need to scroll down here just a little bit, but the Hebrew writer here, he's been going along, he's been writing. Remember, part of the book of Hebrews, we believe, is a sermon that was recorded, and he gets down to this part. There's so many examples of faith throughout the Old Testament that we don't have time to go and list them all, and he lays out a few just here real fast. He talks about Gideon, he talks about Barak, he talks about Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel. Now, for lack of time, we're not going to go and we're not going to look at every single one of these either. For the same reason, but basically it's the idea of the Hebrew writers, I could go on and on and on, talking about examples of faith that bring out this idea. And he even goes on, and we see our words again used here. There's our words right there. Through faith, by faith, because of faith. And there's our people, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, the prophets, and then here's the list of the actions that they all did. Now we can go through and we can look at, we can pretty much identify through faith subdued kingdoms. Gideon and Barak, Samson and Jephthah worked righteousness. David obtained promises. And on and on and on. We can see all of these things. And he gets in to the prophets, and we see stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the fire of violence. And I think it's very interesting because although they're not specifically mentioned here, but we can infer there at the beginning of verse 34, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are included in this. We can go on and look at all of the prophets that are mentioned here. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Jeremiah mentioned here. All of these prophets that we go through and we look in the Old Testament, we see them doing great things because of their what? Because of the faith they have in God. And one of the greatest examples, at least in my mind, actually is Isaiah. Because, and he's not even specifically mentioned here, but Isaiah, God comes to Isaiah, and who shall I send? What does Isaiah say?
Here
Here am I, send me. I think that stands as a great example for us today, isn't it? Because us as Christians, we're called to do what? We're called to go. We're called to go into the world. Matthew chapter 28, verses 28 and 30. 18 through 20, sorry. Mark chapter 16, verses 15 and 16. Great Commission is also found in the book of Luke. It's also found in the book of John. It's found in all 4 gospel accounts. One of the few things that's found in all 4 gospel accounts, the Great Commission. It's important. And Isaiah said, here am I, send me. Now we go back here and we look at some of these guys that we can even get into, moving into verse 35. Here we bring this idea: women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrections. Verse number 36. Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings, yes, and of chains and imprisonments. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains, in dens and in caves of the earth. And on and on and on about all of these different prophets. And again, here in verse 35, we see the Hebrew writer specifically bringing up women again. Women demonstrating their faith. And when you go back now, I think it's a pretty good inference to make that probably the women that's being referred to there in verse 35 is there were 2 women that had their sons resurrected. If you go back by Elijah and Elisha, there were 2 women that had their sons resurrected because of their faith. And Elijah and Elisha there. And you know, we see time after time, and even Christ brings this idea out. What did Israel do to the prophets of the Lord? The prophets of God would come, they would preach God's word, and what more times than not did Israel do to the prophets? They killed them. They killed them. They arrested them, they killed them, they persecuted them, and that's all of this. And we go all the way down through the last of these, all the way down to verse 38. Like, for time's sake, we're not going to go into the details of all of this, because we've talked a lot about these other examples over the last several weeks. And this idea, all of this, they did it because of their faith. They faced death because of their faith. They faced persecution because of their faith. Now, when I was thinking about this, immediately I went to a verse that we all know, Revelation chapter 2 and verse 10. And I'd imagine I could go around and probably everybody here could quote the last part of that verse. Right? Seek ye first, not seek ye first. Man, this is a bad day. Be faithful unto death and you'll receive a crown of life. We all know that, but what does it say before that? You know? We all like to be faithful unto death and you'll receive a crown of life. What does it say before that? Do you remember? Talking to the church at Smyrna, he's telling them you're going to face persecutions, you're going to face time in prison, you're going to suffer because of your faith. You're going to be persecuted because of your faith. And you remember, go back, it's been a long time now, but go back when we went through the book of Revelation. When we went through that, remember the book of Revelation was written in a time where Christianity is illegal in the Roman Empire. It was punishable by death. to be a Christian in the Roman Empire. And John there, he records the words of Christ. You remain faithful. You're going to suffer for Christ, but you remain faithful. And that's the idea, and that's the example that we see time and time again throughout the Old Testament, isn't it? And even time and time again throughout the New Testament, because out of all of the apostles of Christ, how many of them were killed for the cause of Christ? All but two. All but two.
Who was it?
John died of natural causes on the island of Patmos, and Judas killed himself.
Oh, yeah.
Those were the only two. All but two died for the cause of Christ. Yeah.
I'm not trying to bring light upon myself, but I'll give you a real good example in today's world. For 8 years, I run a very large automotive business, CarX, I've run 7 different stores for them. And just recently, I was fired. I was asked to work Sundays several times, and all of a sudden, there was some false accusations made and written me up, and I was fired because I would not work Sundays. Even today, we can go through those persecutions today. But God says to count it what?
Count it worthy.
Joy.
And joy.
Joy. To suffer for the cause of Him.
Yep.
It's difficult for me to look at it that way. Yeah.
It is difficult.
Because now I have to figure out how to supply, more monies for my family and things. And I make good money there too, real good money. And now, taking that away, now, I still need to count it as joy, to be persecuted for Him.
Count it as joy to be persecuted for Christ and to suffer like Christ did. And it's even today. We're going to suffer for the cause of Christ. We're going to deal with it. And one of the ways that I always look at it, and Christ talked about this, they persecuted Christ. They killed Christ. Are we better than Him? If they persecuted and killed Christ, they're going to be the same to us and His followers, because we're not better than Christ. And we can go back, like I said, we don't have time to look or go back and talk about every single example that's specifically mentioned or even alluded to in these first 38 verses of all of the actions that were done for faith. And we've got to remember here, the Hebrew writer, he's just mentioning or alluding to those that were living under the cause of the law of Moses. What about those under Christ that suffered? Those in the Christian age that suffered for the cause of Christ, and all of those. So there's a lot to take into account and a lot to really think about when we think about these verses. Any other comments or questions on anything we've looked at thus far?
We've got it pretty easy.
What?
We've got it pretty easy. If we were to look at what the 7 churches of Asia went through, even before the tribulation that they went through, there was persecutions on them. And then John, of course, wrote what Jesus said, and he told them that there would be more. You will suffer more. They already were almost homeless. And he said, you're going to suffer more.
You're going to suffer more. You're going to suffer more for the cause of Christ. When you go back and you look at secular history in the church in that time period, the 1st and 2nd century, it was bad for
Have you
Christians.
read The Eternal Kingdom?
Yeah. It's a good book. I've read it.
Yeah.
It's, you go back and you look at the history of the church, especially in the 1st and 2nd century, it was rough to be a member of the church. But nonetheless, and we keep that mindset of Moses. He looked at things and rewards. Remember, we talked about that. He looked at rewards that were not found in Egypt. And that's why he forsook Egypt. He went and lived in the wilderness, chose to be called an Israelite instead of being called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He gave up the throne, really, by doing that. And we look for things that are greater. We look for greater rewards. And that's what keeps us going. Verse number 39. And all these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise. Let's stop there for just a second. The writer here, he's coming to an end. He's concluding this list of the examples of the faithful that he's done this. And all of these, you go, these are the faithful. Now, what does it mean to obtain a good testimony? What's the Hebrew writer talking about there?
Well, it'd been the things that he had heard about them.
Yeah, word of mouth, good reputation. You can go back and you can see the things that they have done. You can see the good that they have done. And it's literally the idea of, we've talked about the idea of witness, that it's not something that's hearsay, it's proved. Here's a good witness of what faith can do. Here's a good witnesses of people that acted because of their faith.
Look at 1 Thessalonians. Paul wrote that he had heard about their faith.
He'd heard about their faith. Exactly. That's the idea. We can prove their faith. We know their faith. But now I'm not going to say it's the most important verse in chapter 11, but I think it is an important verse that we need to take note of here, because all of these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise. Now, when we go back and we look at all of these accounts, God made a lot of promises to these guys, didn't he? He made a lot of promises. We go back and we've talked about specifically the promises of Abraham, the seed promise, the land promise. But what specific promise was common across all of them?
Messiah would come.
Messiah, the coming of the Christ. That was the one promise that was common across all of them, going all the way back to Adam. That's the one promise that's common across all of them. And they all lived through faith. They all acted because of their faith, and they never saw this promise. They lived by faith. Many of them died because of their faith, and they never saw the promise of the church. They never saw Christ come. But yet they still lived a life of faithfulness. Why? Verse number 40. God having provided something better for us. Now, I want to pause right there, because there's our word. Word that we've looked at throughout the entire book of Hebrews. We live by faith. We live through faith. Even if we don't physically see the promise, because we're hoping and looking for what? God's provided something better.
Well, they didn't have Christ yet,
No.
back in the old law. But they were told about him coming. Today, we've had Christ that has come and died for us. So how much more should we have faith than what they had?
Our faith should be even greater.
Right.
than theirs because we've got Christ. We've seen that promise come true.
And we got the writings. They didn't have it.
We've got all of the writings, and we've got all of the examples that they didn't have.
Exactly.
And we could see all of the actions. We could see this faith. We could see the power of God. We could see the power of Christ. We could see the unchanging God. We could see the God of righteousness. We could see the God of justice. We could see the God of mercy. We could see the grace that we could talk about. We could see this. And we long for something better. And we have that hope of eternal life. Something better. I always go back when I think about this idea better. When I started thinking about this better in this verse, in this context, I went over to the end of the book of Revelation. There when it talks about heaven. Heaven's a place where there's no tears. A place where there's no pain. A place where we're in the presence of Christ. There's no temptations. There's no suffering. And all of the wonders that we have from heaven. Now, the end of verse 40, that they should not be made perfect apart from us. Now, here is this idea of perfection. And remember, we've got to understand that this perfection can also be rewritten as complete. Perfect or complete apart from it. Now, I remember my grandpa did, where was it? I don't remember now where it was. He passed out a bunch of Bibles. Sent a bunch of Bibles somewhere. I don't remember now where it was. But it was all just New Testament Psalms. It wasn't the full. It was just New Testament Psalms. It was all he could get his hands on at the time. And he handed a couple of them out. And a couple of weeks later, one of the persons that got one of those Bibles called him and asked him, "Where's the rest of it?" My grandpa's like, "What?" He's like, "There's more. Where's the rest of the Bible?" They knew that there was something more. They needed the Old Testament. And here's the idea that we think about. Without the Old Covenant, without the law of Moses, can you have the church?
It's the writings to bring us to the church.
Exactly. The Old Testament, the law of Moses.
I had to think how to say that.
The Old Testament's what brought us to the church. How many times when you go back and you look at the law of Moses, when you go back and you look at the Old Covenant, do you see shadows of the church? Do you see elements of things that are looking towards, that are pointing forward to the church all over the place? You go back and you see it. The new covenant is made perfect because of the old covenant. And Brother Max Patterson here writes at the end of his covenant, without Christ in the church, the scriptures could not be perfect. Without the plan of salvation, the plan would not be complete. And without the complete, inspired scriptures, they cannot be perfect. Talking about how you have to have everything from Genesis to Revelation for it to be complete, for it to be perfect. And Christ is what made that. It was because of faith. They looked forward to Christ. Remember when we talked about, again, this has been a while back too, when we talked about the inspiration of the scriptures. We talked about in apologetics, the inspiration of the scriptures. We talked about the central theme of the Bible, how everything before Acts chapter 2 looked forward to Christ and forward to the church. Then you've got the church is here in the book of Acts, and then everything after that points back to Acts chapter 2, points back to the church has come. and it's here and it's established. That's the idea that we really bring out. It comes to completion.
Brandon, you notice that throughout the Old Testament, everything was by faith, through faith. Even into the New Testament, we have those same words, but there's a change that happens with the new law. It's the faith.
The faith.
What is the faith? The gospel.
The gospel. The faith, the gospel. There, and you go back, and it's a good point to bring out. Going back to John chapter 14 to verse 6, I am the way,
The way.
the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. It's only one. Only one. And the examples in Hebrews chapter 11, they looked forward to that. And they all died looking forward for that promise, hoping for that Messiah to come. Now, we're out of time. I wish we'd have been able to get into verses 1 and 2 of the next chapter. I'll go ahead and give you a little preface to this. I believe that this is one of the places in Scripture where the people who inserted the chapter divides made a mistake, and that verses 1 and 2 of chapter 12 are really the end of chapter 11, because that's how they fit together contextually. So kind of bear that in mind. But Lord willing, next week, that's where we'll start, where we will start. We will start in chapter 12 and verse number 1. And then I will go ahead and just kind of put this little bug in your ear. There's chapters 12 and 13. So kind of start thinking if you have any suggestions about where we want to go when we finish the book of Hebrews. I actually laid it all out, and I'm not going to guarantee you, as a matter of fact, I will actually guarantee you it probably won't work, because I know me. My hope is the first of the year to be done with Hebrews. That's my hope. I don't know that it'll happen, but that's my hope. By the first of the year, the first Sunday in January, we'll start something different. So kind of start thinking about where you want to go. After that, if you have any suggestions, if not, I've kind of been thinking about it. So any other comments, questions, concerns? All right. We thank you for your attention, for your comments. We will take a short break, and then we'll